Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to meticulously trace a very specific, very dark timeline. We're looking at the chronological path of how one of history's most destructive figures was shaped by his early life and his environment. We'll be digging into the established facts, the historical debates, and the exact sequence of events that took a young boy from the Austrian provinces and molded him into a radicalized extremist.
But before we get into those origins, we really have to ground ourselves in the staggering historical cost of his eventual regime. Honestly, the numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. The conflict he initiated became the absolute deadliest in human history. Under his leadership, the Nazi regime perpetrated the genocide of an estimated 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, alongside millions of other victims who were deemed socially undesirable. When you factor in the deliberate killing of 19.3 million civilians and prisoners of war, plus the 28.7 million soldiers and civilians who died in the European theater of military action, we are looking at a completely unprecedented human catastrophe.
So it leaves us asking a deeply unsettling question. How in the world did an aimless, failed artist from the Austrian provinces wind up becoming the architect of this unprecedented tragedy? To understand this, we've got to trace a direct line of cause and effect. We need to strip away the myths, look at the raw history, and start at the beginning in a small town in Austria-Hungary.
Part 1. Ancestry and Early Life, Troubled Beginnings. If you look at his early years, you'll see a family that was constantly on the move. Born in 1889 in Braunau am Inn, which is right near the German border, he experienced total geographical uprooting due to his father's career as a customs official. Take a look at that move to Passau, Germany in 1892. This is actually where he picked up his distinctive Lower Bavarian dialect rather than an Austrian one. They eventually bounced back to Austria, settling near Linz and Leonding. This highly transient youth took place in the declining Habsburg monarchy, an empire he absolutely despised for its ethnic diversity. And all that moving around really contributed to his growing sense of strict German nationalism from a very young age. He and his friends would literally sing the Deutschlandlied instead of the Austrian imperial anthem. It just shows how a fractured sense of home can sometimes breed this desperate need for a rigid nationalistic identity.
Now here's where modern science steps in to debunk a massive historical rumor regarding his ancestry. His father, Alois, was born illegitimate to Maria Schicklgruber and only later took the surname Hitler, a name which likely just meant one who lives in a hut. But for decades, there was this persistent rumor known as the Frankenberger thesis. It was pushed by a former Nazi official and claimed Alois's father was actually a Jewish teenager from Graz. Well, historical records show no such family ever existed there. And to put the final nail in the coffin, a 2025 DNA analysis by researcher Turi King definitively debunked this. By comparing blood from the sofa in Hitler's study with a male-line relative, the DNA match confirmed it was indeed his blood and conclusively proved he did not have Jewish ancestry through his father. Growing up, his home life was essentially an intense, unforgiving battle of wills. His father, Alois, was a successful civil servant who relied on strict discipline and frequent beatings, absolutely demanding his son following his bureaucratic footsteps. Adolf was the total opposite. He was rebellious, grew incredibly morose after the death of his younger brother, and fiercely dreamed of becoming an artist. This clash was so severe that Adolf intentionally bombed his classes at the technical school in Linz, basically hoping his dad would just give up and let him pursue art. After Alois suddenly died in 1903, Adolf eventually left school without a diploma or any clear career plans.
Part 2. The Vienna Years. Incubating Extremism. We see a really stark contrast when he hits his late teens. Following the deaths of both his parents, he arrived in the imperial capital of Vienna in 1907 with these grandiose expectations. He was living off orphans' benefits and fully expecting to study fine art. The reality? He got rejected twice by the Academy of Fine Arts, and since he lacked a secondary school diploma, he couldn't even pivot to architecture. By 1909, the money was gone. He was living a completely destitute bohemian reality, bouncing between homeless shelters and a men's dormitory, just scraping by as a casual laborer and painting cheap watercolors of Vienna's sights.
It was right here, in this environment of bitter personal failure and poverty, that he absorbed a truly toxic cocktail of prejudices. Vienna was a massive hotbed of political extremism at the time. He became heavily influenced by Mayor Karl Lueger, a politician who expertly exploited anti-Semitic sentiment to get votes, as well as George Ritter von Schonero's aggressive pan-Germanism. He was constantly reading pamphlets that warned of an influx of Eastern European Jews, he developed strong anti-Slavic sentiments, and he consumed the racist writings of figures like Houston Stewart Chamberlain. It's a chilling reminder of just how susceptible to extremist scapegoating a person can become when they're facing total personal failure.
But here's a detail that historians find absolutely fascinating. Did his most virulent, murderous anti-Semitism actually solidify during these Vienna years, like he later claimed in his autobiography, Mein Kampf? Well, historians are quick to point out a major contradiction. While he was in Vienna, he actively sold his paintings through a Jewish businessman named Samuel Morgenstern, and many of his regular clients were Jewish. Because of this, historians like Richard J. Evans argue that his ultimate radicalization didn't happen in those Vienna homeless shelters. Rather, it emerged later on, as a direct product of post-World War I paranoia.
Part 3. Soldier and World War I. Finding Purpose. It's wild to think about, but an administrative error actually allowed this Austrian citizen to voluntarily enlist in the Bavarian army in 1914. Serving as a dispatch runner on the Western Front, he finally found the sense of purpose he had always lacked. He literally called it the greatest of all experiences. He was decorated for bravery, and ironically enough, he received the Iron Cross First Class based on a recommendation by his Jewish superior, Lieutenant Hugo Gutmann. But his military world physically and mentally shattered in October 1918. While he was recovering in a hospital from temporary blindness caused by a mustard gas attack, he received the news of Germany's defeat. The shock was so profound that he claimed it brought on a second bout of blindness.
And this brings us to a concept that is absolutely central to understanding his path, the Dolchstoßlegende, or the stab-in-the-back myth. He, along with plenty of other furious German nationalists, simply refused to accept that the German army had lost militarily. Instead, they weaponized a mass delusion. They fabricated a narrative that the army was entirely undefeated in the field, but had been betrayed by the November criminals, meaning the civilian leaders, Jews, and Marxists back home who signed the armistice.
On top of that, this growing paranoia was completely supercharged by the punishing conditions of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was stripped of territory, the Rhineland was demilitarized, and crippling economic reparations were imposed. But the thing that was most infuriating to nationalists was Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, which declared Germany entirely responsible for the war. All of this combined to create a suffocating atmosphere of national humiliation and economic despair. And these were the exact conditions that he would soon expertly exploit.
Part 4. Entry into Politics. Infiltrating Extremism.
Returning to a chaotic post-war Munich, still in the army, he finally found the vehicle for his radicalized worldview. Now, you might assume his rise in politics was some kind of organic grassroots campaign. Actually, no. It literally began as an espionage assignment. In 1919, he was appointed as an army intelligence agent to influence soldiers and infiltrate the German Workers' Party, the DAP, which was a small, anti-government nationalist group. But when he attended a meeting, his fiercely anti-capitalist, anti-Marxist, and anti-Semitic ranting deeply impressed the party chairman, Anton Drexler. So instead of destroying this extremist group, he joined it as member 555. By March 1920, he was officially discharged from the army to run the party full-time, setting up his headquarters in Munich.
To really grasp what his early political persona felt like in person, check out this 1947 eyewitness account from Friedrich Reck-Malatzwein. He describes an encounter where Hitler arrived wearing a floppy hat, carrying a riding whip, and launched into this endless preachy speech before he, quote, began to bellow at us. Reck-Malatzwein noted that everyone just sat there silently, totally confused, overwhelmed by a feeling of dismay, as when on a train you suddenly find you're sharing a compartment with a psychotic. It paints a very visceral picture of his unhinged, deeply unsettling, and violently aggressive political demeanor right from the start.
We've tracked an incredibly dark journey today, going from an aimless youth to an embittered, radicalized soldier, discovering the sheer power of his own hateful voice in Munich's extremist circles. But laying out this dark foundation leaves us with a chilling question for further exploration. How exactly did this fringe, deeply unsettling extremist manage to manipulate a fractured Weimar Republic, systematically dismantle its democracy, and plunge the entire globe into darkness? What mechanisms of power allowed the unthinkable to become a reality? Think on that, and let it drive your curiosity as we continue to study the fragile nature of our history. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.